when engineers chose principle over profit. It started with a refusal, a quiet, career-ending word spoken in a room filled with power and money. The numbers made sense. The market was ready. The profits were undeniable. And yet, a small group of engineers said no. Today, this moment is remembered not for the car that was sold, but for the car that almost was. A machine that could have dominated its era, if not for a decision rooted in ethics, responsibility, and an understanding that not every innovation should be monetized. To understand why this choice still echoes through the industry, we need to return to a time when performance metrics ruled everything. Horsepower wars defined headlines. Acceleration times became marketing weapons. Manufacturers chased extremes because extremes sold. And in that race, one company found itself holding something dangerously powerful. The prototype delivered results no competitor could touch. Its powertrain pushed thermal limits without flinching. Its chassis absorbed stress that would cripple conventional designs. Efficiency, speed, and control aligned in a way executives dreamed about. Market analysts predicted dominance. Investors salivated. The business case was airtight. But the engineers saw something else. They saw margins shrinking between capability and consequence. They saw systems operating so close to failure that real-world misuse could turn innovation into catastrophe. They saw that while the car excelled in controlled environments, it offered no forgiveness to error, neglect, or misunderstanding. Inside the development labs, debates intensified. Marketing pushed for launch timelines. Finance demanded scalability. Legal teams prepared defenses instead of solutions. But the engineers returned to the same question again and again. Just because we can build it, should we sell it? They ran simulations no one asked for. Stressed scenarios far beyond regulatory requirements. Edge cases involving inexperienced drivers, poor maintenance, unpredictable conditions. The results were uncomfortable, not failures, but risks that couldn't be eliminated without fundamentally changing the machine. And changing would destroy what made it extraordinary. As pressure mounted, leadership framed the choice as progress versus hesitation. If we don't sell it, they warned, someone else will. The argument was logical. The industry rewarded boldness, not restraint. But logic wasn't the only force in the room, because the engineers understood something the balance sheets did not. When the machine enters the world, it no longer belongs to the creators. It belongs to chance, to misuse, to human error. And standing at that edge, with profit within reach and responsibility weighing heavier than numbers, they prepared to make a decision that would define their legacy. One that would cost them millions, and earn them something far rarer. The debate spilled beyond engineering floors and into the highest levels of leadership. Boardrooms became battlegrounds where spreadsheets collided with simulations and quarterly forecasts clashed with worst-case scenarios. Executives argued that every groundbreaking car carried risk. That innovation had always demanded courage. That history rewarded those who acted, not those who hesitated. The engineers listened, and then presented something no one expected. They brought failure reports, not from their own prototypes, but from the past. Accidents involving overpowered cars released before safety systems matured. Legal cases where manufacturers lost control of narratives they once dominated. Technologies that reached consumers before education caught up, turning brilliance into tragedy. They weren't predicting disaster. They were reminding leadership that it had happened before. Still, resistance remained fierce. Shareholders wanted growth. Dealers wanted exclusivity. Marketing wanted spectacle. The prototype had already leaked in fragments, blurry photos, whispered performance figures, fueling anticipation that could not easily be undone. Pulling back now risked backlash. Canceling the car could look like weakness. So the engineers proposed a compromise. Limit production. Restrict access. Position the car as a controlled, track-focused experience. Reduce exposure without erasing innovation. It was a path many brands had taken before. But even that solution collapsed under scrutiny. Data showed that partial release wouldn't eliminate the risks. It would simply concentrate them. Extreme capability in the hands of a few was still extreme. And once the technology existed publicly, reverse engineering was inevitable. Copying would follow. control would vanish. The room fell quiet. The decision had narrowed to two paths: sell the car and accept the consequences, or walk away and let the world wonder what might have been. The pressure intensified when competitors caught wind of the hesitation. Rumors spread of rival programs racing towards similar capabilities. Executives warned that refusing to act could surrender technological leadership permanently. Fear crept into the conversation, not fear of danger, but fear of irrelevance. And that fear nearly won. Late one night, after another exhausting round of arguments, the lead engineer requested a final meeting. He didn't bring charts or simulations. He brought a simple statement. This car will redefine what people think is normal, and once that line moves, it never moves back. He explained that releasing the prototype wouldn't just sell units. It would reset expectations across the entire market. Competitors would chase it. Consumers would demand it. Regulations would lag behind it. And the engineers who understood its limits would no longer control its future. Progress, he argued, wasn't just about what could be built. It was about what the world was ready to absorb. Silence followed. Not agreement, but recognition. The realization that this decision wasn't about winning a quarter. It was about shaping the next decade. And as dawn approached, the company stood at the edge of an irreversible choice, aware that whatever they decided, the industry would feel the impact. Because sometimes restraint isn't hesitation, it's leadership. The decision fractured the company in ways no one had anticipated. Engineers stood united, but leadership wavered under pressure from investors, partners, and industry that rewarded bold claims over careful judgment. The prototype sat silent in the testing facility, no longer a symbol of innovation, but a reminder of a choice that refused to go away. As weeks passed, the consequences of hesitation became tangible. Stock analysts questioned the company's direction. Media outlets speculated about internal chaos. Competitors accelerated their own programs, publicly embracing the very risks this team had warned against. Every headline felt like proof that caution carried a price. Inside the engineering division, morale eroded. Some team members wondered if principle had crossed into stubbornness. Others feared their refusal would erase years of work from history. The prototype represented thousands of hours, countless sacrifices, and a belief that engineering could still guide the industry ethically. Letting it disappear felt like betrayal, not just of innovation, but of themselves. Leadership attempted one last internal review, hoping data might tip the balance. But the numbers hadn't changed. The risks remained. The margins were still razor thin. The difference was external pressure, and pressure has a way of distorting priorities. During a closed session, a senior executive finally voiced what many were thinking. "If we don't release it," he said, "we'll look weak. And weakness doesn't survive in this industry." The lead engineer responded quietly, without anger. "Neither does recklessness." That exchange marked the emotional center of the conflict. It was no longer about cars or markets. It was about identity. Was the company willing to accept short-term loss to preserve long-term trust? Or would it sacrifice restraint to maintain the illusion of dominance? The engineers presented a final proposal. Not a compromise, but a safeguard. Archive the technology. Preserve the research. Allow future programs to integrate its lessons gradually, when systems, training, and regulations could evolve alongside it. The innovation would not vanish. It would mature in silence. The proposal was met with resistance, but also relief. It offered a way forward without forcing a public gamble. It allowed leadership to step back without admitting failure. And most importantly, it protected people from consequences they weren't prepared to face. After hours of debate, the vote was taken. The project would not move to production. The room was still. No celebration. No applause. Just a weight of finality settling over everyone present. The engineers felt loss, but also clarity. They had chosen responsibility over recognition. Safety over spectacle. Trust over profit. As the prototype was wheeled into storage, covered and cataloged, its story ended quietly. No headlines. No farewell tours. Just a machine locked away with ideas years ahead of their time. But its influence did not end there. Because restraint has a strange power. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't trend. but it shapes the future in ways that reckless success never can. And the industry was about to learn just how far that choice would ripple. The aftermath unfolded slowly, almost invisibly. Without a public launch, the world moved on, chasing louder innovations and flashier promises. To outsiders, the car never existed. But inside the company, its absence became a reference point, a quiet standard against which future decisions were measured. The archive prototype didn't gather dust. Its data lived on in secure servers, studied by teams who understood the weight of what had been restrained. Systems inspired by its architecture were introduced gradually, wrapped in layers of safety, redundancy, and education. What once felt dangerous became manageable. What once demanded perfection evolved into technology that forgave mistakes. Years later, competitors released machines eerily similar to what this team had locked away. But their versions arrived before the ecosystem was ready. Accidents followed. Recalls mounted. Regulations tightened abruptly. Public trust eroded. The headlines were familiar, warnings the engineers had voiced long before anyone listened. Quietly, the company that had refused to release its prototype weathered the storm. While others scrambled to explain failures, it stood on the sidelines with a rare advantage: credibility. Customers remember which brands had rushed and which had waited. Trust, once lost, proved impossible to buy back. Internally, the engineers became mentors. Their story was passed down to new hires not as a tale of loss, but of discipline. They taught that innovation carries responsibility, that every breakthrough demands a question more important than can we. The question that defines maturity. Should we? The prototype itself was eventually dismantled, not destroyed, but redistributed. Components were studied, then retired. Lessons were documented. And in doing so, the car achieved something few machines ever do. It influenced the world without ever touching it. Its legacy wasn't measured in sales or lap times, but in accidents that never happened, in expectations that shifted more slowly, in an industry forced to confront the consequences of speed without restraint. And perhaps that was its greatest achievement, because sometimes the most powerful statement an engineer can make is silence. The courage to step back when the world demands forward motion. The discipline to protect people who will never know what almost reached them. The car that was never sold became a guardian of the future, proving that progress guided by principle doesn't slow the world down. It saves it. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. When